In this series of videos, we're looking at flexible budgets. In the previous video, I walked through just a quick example of kind of what a flexible budget is and why we do it. Now we're going to do a problem. This is an old exam question. I've dredged up, just grabbed an old final exam, and here's the problem. Below is the overhead performance report of Chang Inc. And there's their overhead performance report, and I'm already kind of getting the vibe here. So it says activity level in units. We had 250 units that we moved. We were planning on 220, and here are the costs. So you can see the costs were planned to be 7634, 1738. We were way over in terms of our costs. In terms of our fixed costs, we were just a little bit under, but overall we were 1308 unfavorable compared to our static budget. Now we all know what a flexible budget would say is, like, this is all reasonable and this is all fine to do, but when I want to see how somebody's performing and how they're doing, it's more helpful to compare apples to apples. So rather than comparing what actually happened, the 250 activity level and all the related expenses, why don't I make a new budget as if I knew I was going to have a 250 activity level? Then I'm more seeing how the person did, because again, if we're busier than expected, of course we're going to spend more on indirect materials and power and other variable costs. It just makes sense. So why don't I make a new budget at this higher activity level? And that's what flexible budgeting is in a nutshell. So reading on, Wendy Qian, CEO of Chang, that's my mother-in-law's name, is furious. This is unacceptable. The spending in this company is out of control. Upon seeing the overhead perform, I'm used to my mother-in-law being mad at me, so that's why I've made her a furious character in this problem. By the way, if I know you in my real life, there's a good chance I'm going to put you in a problem, and you may not like the impersonation I give of you. Upon seeing the overhead performance report above, the accountant for Chang notices some obvious problems. In good form below, or good form, prepare a new improved overhead performance report based on the flexible budget method and comment as to whether spending is really out of control or not. Okay, so we're going to need to make a new budget. We're going to make a new budget at 250 being our activity level. We'll compare that to the actual of 250 and we'll see what the variance is, and we'll see if Wendy is right or if she's out to lunch. So let me make a new page here. Let me get my pen tool kicking and let's do this. So again, we are preparing for Chang Inc. A flexible budget. I'm going to say overhead MOH performance report. And this was, I think, for the year ended December 31st, 2012. All right, and so to prepare this overhead performance report, it's going to just look like our other budget, right? Like it's going to look exactly like this chart, except for the static budget column is going to be led by something where the activity level is 250 units, not 220 units. We're just going to upgrade our static budget. We're going to compare it to what actually happened, and we'll look at the variance and see how we did. So let's start there, and maybe I'll actually fill it out on the chart. I want to know the formula here. Oops. Oh my goodness, my writing, what happened? The formula for how they figured out those static budget amounts. So it's indirect materials, which are a variable cost, means the more units we make, the more we're going to spend on indirect materials. We're 7634, and that's based on a 220 unit activity level. So let's figure out the cost per unit. 7634 divided by 220, and our cost per unit, 7634 divided by 220, our cost per unit is 34.7. For power, it was 1738 divided by 220, and it's 7.9 per unit. So again, that was just 1738 over 220. Okay, so we've got our formulas for indirect materials and power. I could add those together and get a total variable cost probably doesn't really matter. So let's start to fill in a new budget then. So our first line there, and I'm just copying what was already there, was activity level. And our activity level, well, the actual was 250. Our new budget, I'll call it the flex budget, the flexible budget activity level is going to be for 250. These two have to match. That's the whole point of a flexible budget, right? We are sort of flexing it to match what really happened, and therefore when we compare performance, we can kind of see how the person really did if it's an apples to apples comparison. So our new flex budget is going to be 250. Moving up, the next line down was variable cost, and indirect materials was our first variable cost. And let's deal with the budget side of this first. We are going to say variable costs, indirect materials were $34.70 per unit. So $34.70 per unit when you have 220 units is $7,600. $34.70 when you have 250 units equals 34.7 times 250, 86.75. So our new flexible budget for indirect materials is 86.75. Let's continue on. Let's do power. Power is 7.9. So again, the math here, I'm going to take that formula number 7.9 times by the new number of units, the newly budgeted number of units of 250, and I get 1975. And so my total variable cost or variable expenses budgeted, and my new budget, 8675 plus 1975 is 10,650. I'll move down to my fixed cost now. My fixed costs consisted of supervision and rent. And I had budgeted, when again at a level of 220 units, I said, oh, my supervision is going to cost me $1,600, my rent's going to cost me $7,300. Well, if it was 250 units, if I knew that at the beginning of the year that would be 250 units, I would say, well, these are fixed costs, so it's still going to be 1,600, it's still going to be 7,300. So the flexible budget should not affect fixed costs, because that's what makes a fixed cost fixed, right? It's going to be 1,600 and 7,300 regardless of the level I'm budgeting at, unless the question tells us something different, or unless we just know something different in reality, but we don't here. So it's 1,600 and 7,300 I was planning on. Well, that's what I would have been planning on even if I knew I would have 250 units. What was it? 1,600 and 7,300. So our total fixed costs are, what is that, 8,900? And our total costs overall, or our total expenses, variable plus fixed, 10,650 plus 8,900, 19,550. Again, if I want to be good about formatting, I'll put a $sign on the top and 1 on the bottom. I think I should be good to go. Okay, so I think we're all set here. Now let's move on and just fill in our actual, and our actual don't change, right? It doesn't matter what amount of budgeting I do, that doesn't change what actually happened. So let's fill out the actual column, and I'm just copying it down. 8745 for my indirect materials, 2065 for my power. Add them together and you get 10,810 for the total. Fixed costs were 1,560 and 7,210. So the grand total there for my fixed costs were 8,770. Yes, I'm just copying this down. adding 10, my variable cost to my fixed cost, 8770, nets us a grand total here, total cost of 19,580. Okay, so now the million-dollar question, did we blow the budget, and if so, did we blow it badly? The variance. So again, activity level, well, if we've done this right, there's no variance, 250 to 250, and that's the whole purpose of this thing, so there better not be a variance there. 87.45 versus 86.75 means there's a $70 variance. We've got to say, is this a good variance or bad variance? Is it favorable or unfavorable? The answer is, well, we actually spent 8,700. We should have spent 8,600. We blew the budget. This is unfavorable. 2065 versus 1975. Well, we blew the budget again. It's unfavorable. So overall, in terms of our variable costs, we blew the budget. In terms of fixed cost, we were $40 to the good there, $90 favorable there. So overall, in terms of fixed costs, we were 130 favorable. If I take the 160 unfavorable, the 130 favorable, I end up $30 to the bad. Now, let's compare this to sort of before. Before it looked like we blew our budget by $1,300. Certainly blowing the budget by $30 compared to $1,300 is a pretty big difference. So when Wendy Chien, CEO of Chang Inc. says, this is unacceptable, the spending in this company is out of control, I would say, well, look, we did blow the budget, and that's not a good thing. That's not like great news. But to say it's out of control, I think would be mischaracterizing it. Certainly we blew the budget by $1,300. She's got more of an argument. But the reality is we were busier than we expected. We only really blew our budget, if you make it a flexible budget, by 30. So anyway, I hope this has been helpful for you in learning how to prepare a flexible budget and to kind of interpret one. But the gist is pretty easy, right? You just sort of say, okay, we are planning on 220. The reality was we did 250 in terms of volume. Why don't I update my old budget to reflect what really happened? So hopefully that helps. That's the gist of flexible budgeting, and that's all for this video series.